right, guys, listen to some blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
All right, and we are live. I'm author Douglas A. Burton, and I am joined here tonight by Hollywood screenwriter Cameron Pasha. And tonight we're going to discuss something that has kind of come up out of nowhere. And the more we look at it, the more verifiable or realistic it looks, which is the losses that Lucasfilm may have endured under the Kathleen Kennedy era. That is from 2012 to 2026 here. We always knew that, things weren't good, but when you really start to add up the numbers and you break it down sector by sector, we see what might be staggering losses. And this came about in a couple different ways. Cameron, did you want to maybe talk about where this initiated, and then I could talk about how I followed up?
Sure. Well, this is all actually the result of the live stream we did, I believe, on Friday, where we had Retro Nerd Girl, a wonderful friend of ours, and we were just talking in general about Ms. Kennedy's stepping down finally, officially, even though I maintained for my Patreon that she's been out of power for almost 2 years, which has kind of been affirmed by her own exit interview, which suggested she was talking about leaving 2 years ago. What an interesting timing coincidence, right? But in any event, we were talking, and then you put up an AI guesstimate that you had based on real information that you knew of, saying, let's try to figure out how much money Lucasfilm might have lost during her reign, and you came up with about a $7 billion, and you said it was a conservative estimate. You didn't put all the data in.
That one wasn't AI. That was me hunting down all that info and adding it into an Excel sheet.
Yeah. Okay, forgive me, but you came up with that analysis. You took the time to do that. Nobody does that anymore. It's like banging your own horseshoe, my friend. Good on you. Good on you for doing that old school research, right?
It took a long time.
Yeah, but yeah. So you came up with a conservative estimate of $7 billion. You said it was conservative, and it just so happened, and I actually received a text which I did not see while because we were so absorbed talking that I received a text through my backphone system of communication I have that my Disney Insider codename Sparrow was actually watching live. They were one of the people watching, and which is, I'm sure, fun for you to know. They were actually
That's awesome.
Live stream. And so when they saw the number, they sent a message through my system to get to me. It's like, no, it's actually closer to 14 billion, twice your estimate. And so I didn't see that at the time because it would have been fun to have talked about it. But after we finished the live stream, I got the text. I was like, oh, and then I put an article on my Patreon, which I don't know if you're able to pull up, but the article on Patreon just pulls up essentially that because that's all the information they gave. They said that's the actual closer figure based on what they've heard inside of Disney, that is $14 billion loss on Lucasfilm. And I put that out there, and that obviously shocked a lot of people on my Patreon, and a lot of intense reactions to that figure because it seems incomprehensible. But because you are like a dog with a bone, you're like, I got to see, is this realistic? Is this realistic? Is this wacky number? Can we is this a believable thing based on publicly known information? And you did further analysis, and then you shared with me yesterday this analysis, which is what we're going to go through today. But from basically, I'm not passive new, but basically your conclusion suggests that this is Sparrow's claim of a $14 billion loss at Lucasfilm is actually realistic.
Yeah. So this is Cameron's article here. I can actually zoom in a little bit.
Mhm.
So this is a screenshot, and what you see on the screen is the Excel grid, like you said, the old school way of looking at data. What I was creating was the minimum provable losses. Minimum provable, meaning anything I could find that was considered an expense that was documented or cited, I put into that grid. I did it chronologically, and I calculated it. And if you look at the bottom there, I came up to about $10.7 billion spent, which is an incredible number there. And then I took what we knew of as maximum verifiable profits. This does not include a lot of things like marketing costs or anything like that. Yeah. And it came up to this number. And if you just do, like I said, the minimum provable baseline was $7.45 billion lost in this enterprise. So at that time, that's all I was trying to do, was just trying to get to a number that could be worked, just a number that could be worked, one that we could rely on. And that is, by the way, 7.4 billion is staggering enough as it is, because these are for-profit companies. They're there to spend $1 million, hopefully make more than $1 million on everything. I mean, that's the general idea. Every movie's supposed to make money, and this is also Star Wars, where it was viewed as a money-making machine.
Yeah. Remember, they invested, what was it, $5 billion in this purchase price was approximately $5 billion, if I remember correctly.
$4.05 billion on the acquisition of Lucasfilm. Yeah. And at the time, I actually went back and looked at some 2012 news articles, and the belief was this was going to make its money back really fast. The experts all said that Lucasfilm is underexploited. It's not being utilized. Lucasfilm he's not doing enough with this, and therefore there's this great moneymaker sitting on the shelf, and Disney's, we know what to do with it. We'll take it off the shelf. We will make money. So zoom ahead to today, 7.4 billion in losses was nuts. So when you said,
it should be a minimum of $7 billion in profit. That's why you entered this, because all they had to do was put that $4 billion in short-term treasuries, and and I'm sure they would have made us a very hefty sum on that. If they had done nothing else and just put that in there, they would probably have made $6 or $7 billion on top of that over 14 years.
Disney would have made more money putting it into a standard savings account with what, a 0.05% interest rate. They would have made more money doing that. So the fact that they've lost this much money was stunning. So when you said that your insider Sparrow told you that the number was actually closer to 14 billion, I was like, okay, I think now it's time to look, and let's take a deeper dive. So what I did not include a lot of hard costs, and I didn't include some other areas of profitability perhaps. So what I did was I paid for an AI service, and it's easy to say this is AI. It doesn't really count, and
which is generally, by the way, that is because I know when you sent it to me, my initial reaction was it stopped sending me AI speculation, which I still am very anti AI and very anti this technology, but it has its purposes, and you have more faith in them than I do. But I do think this is a valuable program you're working
with. Well, this one, right? So I'm a little touchy when it comes to AI myself, and I've worked with it for research, so I've gotten a little bit better at kind of boxing in the AI to force it to look in certain areas, verifiable, documented sources. It cites its sources, and then a lot of times I've gotten to the habit of give me a percent of credibility that this is. What's your confidence level on this assessment? So what I did was I asked, I said, is 14 billion even conceivable? And to be honest, Cameron, I thought because it's AI, it was going to be like, whoa, no way. There's no way that's conceivable. And
especially because most of AI is government propaganda, but that's another conversation.
So right. Part of me, right. Now, there is ways to get around that. You have to box it in, and you can.
Correct. No, I've done that. Like on ChatGPT, when it refuses to go down the road, I just re-question the question until it goes down the road.
Right. You can, if you give it too much of an open end, it'll kind of move into a default position. If you say, I want you to analyze this data set and come up to conclusions, it'll do it. It'll give you really good responses.
As long as you stay away from the the parameters the system has put in, so it doesn't give information the system doesn't like. Yes,
correct. That's right. And it's funny because I've even taught my kids how to use AI. It'll ask an open-ended question, AI will answer it. I'm like, that's not even correct. Ask it a follow-up question, and then it like immediately contradicts itself. So there is a trick to this. And what I did was I asked the AI to examine this claim and to study from SEC filings, from documented verifiable data, from other articles and publications that have cited sources, to kind of amalgamate all this information, dissect it, break it down, and then decide whether, or give me some answer as is this credible or not. And the AI, to my surprise, said yes. In fact, the original, it said that it's mathematically sound, given all the parameters that it looked at. And once I saw that, I was like, oh my, and it had like 152 sources, by the way. So to me, that's a lot of data that it's going through. And it took 4 minutes, and that's a long time for AI to go through and crunch some data here. So it starts, remember, Disney starts in the hole at 4.05 billion. You have to understand there's something called GAAP, generally accepted accounting practices.
Yeah. You know, I went to business school. We studied that stuff. Yeah.
Yes. So there is, so for example, Disney paid 4.05 billion, not Lucasfilm. So from an accounting standpoint, you might get someone who says, well, Lucasfilm didn't lose that money, Disney did. Whatever, from this reality, from the idea of what
I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's Disney that paid for this company, and that profits flow upwards in any GAAP situation. Profits ultimately flow upwards, and if they're not, and if losses are going to be, flowing upwards as well. So yeah.
Right. That's exactly right. So, and I'll just read some of this. In October 2012, Disney acquired Lucasfilm for 4.05 billion, paid roughly equal cash parts and stock. CFO Jay Rizzullo openly stated that the valuation was driven, quote, almost entirely by the potential of Star Wars as a film and franchise engine. Engine is a very bullish word for making profit. The acquisition also brought Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, Skywalker Sound, the Indiana Jones IP, and the Lucasfilm corporate infrastructure under the Disney umbrella. By design, the deal only makes sense if the subsequent content slate not only repays the 4.05 billion principal, but also earns an equity level return over time. That has not happened. So confidence in this number, 100%. It was publicly stated. There's no doubt about it. Theatrical films. So one thing that we wanted to talk about, and Cameron had mentioned as well, that Disney in 2015 and 2018 made two separate statements basically saying, we've already made our money back. You guys, all this speculation, it doesn't matter. We've made our money back. We're sitting pretty. Maybe there was a case that there was some profit made early on in the wake of The Force Awakens, because which is
very believable, because everyone was happy with The Force Awakens. I remember I said at our last stream that I had read in 2012, at the time of the announced acquisition and the announced new sequel trilogy being led by J.J. Abrams, I had read a business analyst report that they expected the first movie to make $2 billion, which is exactly what it did. And so that was exactly the thing. What they didn't expect was they expected the second movie to make $2.5 billion, and it made half. Right, that's where things started derailing. But at The Force Awakens, it looked like everything was on track.
Right. So, which is the Force Awakens was 2015, Rogue One was 2015. So at that point, guys, by 2015, it looks like Disney's on a roll. Here we go. The steamroller is rolling, and now the profits are going to start rolling in. And quite honestly, the exact opposite has happened to what I have regarded at this point as catastrophic levels. So anyway, I just want to say hi to a couple people in the chat
for what
as
would
well.
happen next. There's no rational reason for what would then happen, right? What happens, because it continues. We have, we have then Rogue One, which is highly well received. So everything remains on track.
That is 100% correct. And I remember I bought tickets to go see The Last Jedi. I flew out to Florida to see my father and my friends. And I mean, this was still an event for me in The Last Jedi before I knew what it was. And so up until, and I remember sitting in the theater and boom, it starts up and there's Rian Johnson. And he's got a special message for all of us out there telling us how much he loved the film. Up until that 20th Century Fox, all was well in the world of profitability for Lucasfilm. Real quick, I just want to say hi to some people in the chat. Darth Plato, Stephanie Janicek. Who else we got here? Shanatsky, Stacy B on YT is here.
Osvaldo Lopez is here. They also complimented us on the last stream. They saw that.
Thank you, and thank you very much. When you have Cameron on, there's a lot of substantive commentary that's just gonna occur on its own. So anyway, so here it says theatrical films from engine to stall.
Yeah.
On paper, the theatrical film should have been an engine that pays for everything else. Initially, they were, but once accounting moves beyond the quote headline box office into full studio profits and loss, the picture looks far less triumphant. And it goes through each film, the cost of making it, and remember how long until we got the real numbers for these production costs. It took a while because they were hidden. There was some tax benefits.
Eventually, some Forbes reporter finally broke a lot of this information open recently. Yeah,
right. That's right. So now we have better data, and we can ignore their boastful claims from 2015 and 2018. Now that we have a really good picture and a lot more information to go off of. So, and you see here, it tells you what they make, and these are making some money. Last Jedi still net about 166 million. Which, by the way, is not a lot for a Star Wars film.
Oh, let's go to Rogue One. Let's go to Rogue One. So Rogue One again, creatively, everything was on track. Cost $501 million. And it made after expenses. It made about $120 million. So again, we're adding to it. We're adding to the bucket of gold here. So
right. And so Force Awakens. This is an incredible haul. Even with the ridiculous production costs. $407 million bottom line, net profit. That's phenomenal. That's still an impressive number.
And remember, now when we get to Rogue One, the first warning sign of her behavior patterns, of Ms. Kennedy's producer behavior patterns, start evidencing, because Rogue One was heavily reshot. It ended up being a wonderful movie. But it was very heavily reshot. So that cost of $410 million, I'm guessing the original movie was probably budgeted at maybe 75% of that, maybe about $300 million.
What does it say? Yeah, 410. Yeah, you know what? It was probably. I bet they doubled the cost by the end of it because Rogue One's a spinoff. It's not a part. I remember there was a debate at the time. Do we have an opening scroll because it's not part of? It's the first film that's not really part of the Skywalker saga. That was a debate at the time. Sure. And you're right. There was evidence that there was some weird stuff and that stuff that we had not seen yet. Remember, there was stuff in the trailer that never appeared in the movie. There was this great shot in the trailer
of the TIE fighter coming up.
Of the TIE fighter rising right in front
of the tower. Yeah, and it still looks cool. I don't know what happened that they got rid of it. It probably would have worked in the sequence I saw.
I remember having discussions with people saying, after watching the trailer to Rogue One, it looks almost artistically shot. It was very impressive. There was that scene of Krennic walking into the water with his cape. So anyway, but you're right. Technically, that's evidence of something misfiring behind the scenes if you're having to gut everything and the trailer's a little bit off there.
Now we can see the pattern, by the way. So Force Awakens, she largely hands over control to J.J. Abrams with a few instructions, including that this is no longer Luke's story, right? And he follows those instructions. And from all the story I've heard, she wasn't really day-to-day involved in that. Rogue One, apparently after the movie had been shot or substantially shot, others involved in the process didn't like it. And so then she starts getting a new director, starts screwing around. This is the pattern we start seeing, is that she's disengaged from what's happening on Rogue One. She did what she did to J.J. Abrams. Here, you take the movie and run with it. She's essentially not watching dailies, or is not getting that something isn't what at least some people want in the system, right? She doesn't get that until hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent, and then she comes in suddenly and starts doing a last-minute triage that costs $100, maybe $200 million. So this is the first time that's her gut reaction. We see that she's detached from the production process, and a crisis happens that she's unprepared for, and her response to it is to throw money.
Right. And I think that it actually stemmed right away from Force Awakens. My theory, this is just my personal opinion here, is that she secretly harbored resentment for let's say the Spielberg Lucas era of Hollywood, where she was the person coming in to get coffee and everything. I think she harbored some resentment there, and like a lot of assistants, they think they can rule the kingdom. It's an ancient tale, right, Cameron? They think they can run the kingdom, they conspire against the king, and I think what happened was Force Awakens validated her early on. She's like, I could do it. I knew I could do it. I just made the biggest money. I made a big market. So I think by the time you got to Rogue One, you already saw evidence that she's starting to run some red lights here. Yeah. And then, it makes money. 120 million is nothing.
It could have made more money had it not been heavily reshot.
Yeah, totally. I mean, with the figures that it's making, it's still amazing that if there was any sort of discipline in the spending and the budgeting, these could have been absolute runaway juggernauts in the box office. I mean, in terms of profit. Yeah. So Last Jedi comes in, and here's what I find interesting is The Last Jedi barely outgrosses Rogue One. That should have been a warning sign.
Which is horrifying because remember, the trend is supposed to be up. It's supposed to be bringing in 2.5 million. So then the net of that, then the studio share would have been about 1.25 million. And so we're looking at, it should have had a $700 million profit.
Right. So Force Awakens made this is the bottom line, what they made, not what the box office says. It's what they put in their pocket.
By the way, I don't think this is even taking into account marketing, but so
it does. Now these numbers do take into account marketing.
Then that's so we have fixed cost includes marketing. All right.
Right. So that just shows you though, $2+ billion at the box office, they kept maybe 25% of that in the end. Yeah. So because of marketing costs and runoffs.
Which is realistic. That's very realistic in Hollywood.
So, that's not, I think the extra budgeting is the weird thing at the time for Lucasfilm. But so their profit margin went from 407 put in their pocket to 166 by The Last Jedi.
So we're about $600 million short of what it should have brought in.
Yes. And
to their bottom line, to their net result.
And then right after that big alarm goes off, we see that Solo loses. Look at that, 309 million. At this point, you've almost erased with Solo. You've almost erased the profits from. And remember, Solo. The reason it lost this much is because of what Cameron's talking about, right? The reshoots. Miller and Lord.
Double. It's literally they made a new film. That movie was 90% finished, and they made a new film. So this Solo should have cost for probably about 250 million, right? Which is probably what Rogue One should have cost originally, right? So, at 250 million, and again, the loss, I'm convinced, was not the result of anything wrong with Solo. I know Stephanie and others hate the movie. I've never seen it. I can't comment on it, but I will say my instinct is that the loss is the direct feedback on The Last Jedi, because one of the rules we learned in Hollywood is it doesn't, I learned this on the first TV show I worked on. It doesn't matter what your premiere night's ratings are. When I worked on The Bionic Woman, we had something like 16 million people watch the premiere episode of Bionic Woman, right?
Wow.
Which back even to this is what, 10, 15 years ago? Even then, that's still a lot of people. Even we didn't, 16 million people watching network wasn't happening in the late 2000s, which was where we were. And so people watched that, and we were all excited, but I wasn't excited because I knew the stuff that was happening behind the scenes, the disaster that was coming, right? I knew it because I was there. But I knew that next week is what matters, because how people respond to the episode is who's going to come back next week. And next week we had 7 million. We lost over 50%. So 9 million people said, I don't like this show based on the pilot. And then it would just go down from 7 to 3 to 3 and just disappeared. Our audience disappeared, right? But it's the next week. So this was I learned that in television. The next thing is what reveals the reaction to the previous thing. So this loss is the direct result of Last Jedi anger.
Well, and I'll tell you, use yourself as a sample. So I was so upset at Last Jedi, it actually was hurting my head because I'm a writer. Yeah. And after I walked out of The Last Jedi, I was like, I can't make any sense of why they would write it this way. It structurally disrupts the entire storyline, because now Episode 9, the final film, it can't just wrap up the sequel trilogy arc. It has to wrap up from Episode 1 to Episode 9. You have to wrap up the 9.
Correct. The entire journey, and this derails all of the movies.
It made it. I was like, "There's no way." I remember passionately discussing this with people. I was like, "From a structural standpoint, this is a dead end, and it makes no sense." So just to put this into context, talk with today's dollars, this is post-inflationary period. Solo cost 505. The Mandalorian and Grogu cost 120. Right, Cameron? Is that the right number?
I don't know. I don't have the figures.
I think it's 120 million
for the whole season. Yeah. Oh,
no,
the
no,
Mandalorian Grogu, the feature film. Okay.
I don't know.
I don't have those figures.
Yeah,
but I do remember it was substantially lower than these things that are being spent on. So I do remember that. Yes.
So when you look at these numbers, they don't make any sense. And what's funny to me is we're just now seeing this 505 million. People knew behind the scenes, Iger, the executives, they had to have been like, what is she doing? How is she spending 505 million? And then the movie comes back and no one went to see it. I remember I was like, I am not going to see Solo. I am not going to go see it.
Well, that was my reaction. I know our friend Stephanie is saying the movie itself is bad. I can't speak for everyone, Stephanie. I know you saw it. You didn't like it. Others will agree with you. And not everyone's agreeing in the chat. It doesn't matter to me at all because I didn't see it. I didn't see it because I was angry of The Last Jedi. That's why I did not go. I didn't wasn't impressed with the commercials I saw for Aaron Reich as Han Solo. I wasn't impressed by that, but I'd already decided not to go. That was a decision made off of Last Jedi, personally.
Right. I had no interest in going. I did not go. I saw it. I rented it and I watched it at home on streaming. And when I saw it, I was so unmoved. It wasn't bad. Like I don't think it was bad, but it wasn't good either. It was very blasé. It was very new. I was very neutral, and I've never seen it again. So that'll tell you something. I've never had any desire to
rewatch. You're supposedly relaunching one of the classic heroes of the 20th and 21st century. That shouldn't be the feeling of blasé. That shouldn't be there.
Yeah, and there was the big Darth Maul reveal at the end. None of this mattered. Yeah. And keep in mind, this is also in the era of the MCU, where these little crossover teasers were getting a lot of attention because everyone thought everything's going to be the next big thing, and nobody cared. In a Star Wars film about the return of one of the classic villains from the prequels, Darth Maul is one of the best things about the Phantom Menace, at least visually, at the very least.
Absolutely, he is. And he's a great character within the mythos in general.
So here you've got The Rise of Skywalker, again, a staggering production cost after all was said and done. It basically broke even. So think about that. The end of the triple trilogy Star Wars saga goes out by basically breaking even.
So it brings in nothing to increase the coffers while we've had the coffers decrease due to a $300 million loss. So basically, now remember the projection, the very realistic projection for the third movie was $3 billion, which was at the time in 2012 seemed crazy, but then Avengers movies would go on to make that kind of money, right? So we now discovered that was possible. Avengers movies increased to $3 billion, right?
That's right.
So that was possible, and that should have happened here. So had it been $3 billion, then the studio take would have been $1.5 billion. So it should have had $1 billion profit. So with Last Jedi should have had a $700 million profit, and this should have been what? So it should have been. We're at least $1.4 billion off of where we should have been in the coffers.
Yeah. I mean, so here's the thing. Imagine being in the executive circles where you're looking at the real numbers. I'd be like, look, guys, we came out strong. We added to the coffers with Rogue One. We added just a few chips into the coffers with The Last Jedi, and they went to war with the fans after that. So this is not a policy where you're endearing yourself to the crowd and perhaps getting, bringing in new fans. Because remember, the whole idea was we're going to diversify and everything to bring in new fans, which at the time made sense. And that before we saw how this was going to work, they lost fans over this. And then they lose a bunch of money off Han Solo lost money. Rise of Skywalker breaks even. That's it. We did our trilogy. We essentially made almost nothing if you take into account the losses of Solo and the negligible.
Yeah, we're looking at maybe a $300 million profit over 3 movies. That's insane. That's nothing.
That's nothing.
When should have had a $2 billion profit over 3 movies.
Right. At this point, I think Disney execs and Lucasfilm expected to be able to sit back. We did it. We have a new trilogy out
Yeah,
there.
in
We
theory,
have
you should
new.
have paid for half of the acquisition just through these films.
Yeah. And then
That's
if
what
you were
should have been.
successful merchandising, because let's be honest, the merchandising for Force Awakens was off the hook. Like it went nuts. I remember buying a bunch of stuff. And by the time we got to Last Jedi, it really did die down. And I don't think anyone bought merchandise for The Rise of Skywalker. I remember seeing that stuff. That's when I stopped buying stuff. So anyway, and then of course, Kennedy, in my opinion, stayed on, insisted on, she was going to walk. I think she should have been let go then. But she stayed on.
Any normal person, no matter how powerful they are, would be let go. I know that because I was present. I was working on the Tron animated series, Tron Uprising, which you can all watch on Disney Plus. I was working on that when I was on the Disney lots. When John Carter came out, and John Carter was the biggest disaster. And I think it remains the largest loss in Hollywood history, right? It replaced Ishtar as that. And
that's right.
It came out that weekend. And on Monday, the head of Disney was fired. The head of Disney was forced to step down on Monday after that movie was released. The head of Disney, the head of the studio. I mean, so we're talking about not the head of a division, but the head of the company was forced to step down, right? And and fall on the sword for it. So normal people, normally in Hollywood, nobody, studio head is not safe from this kind of disaster, right? She should have been fired. Literally, normal people in normal Hollywood system, you would be let go after Solo, because the first Star Wars movie, you don't want the news headline to be the first Star Wars movie that made a loss in all of history in 50 years. You don't want that. That's the news headline. That's when you get let go in any normal circumstance.
Right. Yeah. And you are an insider. You understand. And like you said, you've seen this firsthand. I am more of an outsider. So I am more of the, God, wouldn't someone be fired by now? Or why is she still there? And my opinion is that she kind of insisted on staying and decided she was going to save her reputation by throwing this Hail Mary for Indiana Jones. Another sure thing. She thought there was pent up demand. And if you listen to some of the interviews, she was even saying things like, we have to fix the mess that was left behind from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And believe it or not, she ended up making Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Here she is throwing Spielberg under the bus, right? Her former mentor.
And
I alone can fix it.
Yeah. And now Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, shockingly, is not the worst Indiana Jones. So, and it's not a great movie. But Dial of Destiny, look at this loss, by the way. $420 million. You're in the red. You are now in the red with theatrical releases of LucasFilm, one of the most should have been one of the most profitable studio IPs across the board, all the IPs you could have drawn from. So, yeah, I mean, 420, that's a staggering loss. That's one of the biggest losses of all time, by the way.
Yeah.
So it says right here, when the dust settles, aggregate theatrical costs, $3.16 billion.
So
aggregate
was Indiana Jones bigger loss than John Carter? I'll have to look that up.
Let me see.
Because I know John Carter was the biggest loss up to that moment. John Carter lost 200. So no, it is the biggest loss in history.
Yeah,
John Carter lost $200 million. So Indiana Jones is the greatest loss in history.
I mean,
you should be fired then.
So look at this
Hollywood history.
Well, and that's why we're discussing this, because at the end of the day, this should have been nothing but billions and billions and billions, and it was somehow the opposite. So we're looking at the numbers here. Look at this. Aggregate theatrical cost, $3.16 billion. Aggregate theatrical revenue, the studio share, 3.12. Net theatrical result, they roughly lost $35 million over 8 years with Star Wars and Indiana Jones films. It's almost impossible to believe. Now, you can make the case that you broke even, and maybe from a marginal standpoint you have, but they lost money. I mean, at this point, you have to be going, oh man, what's going to happen next? And this is where you have an already bad situation that's going to blow up in your face, because now Bob Iger got it in his mind that streaming is where we're going to spend our money. And this is where Lucasfilm said, sign me up, and immediately drove their costs up beyond all recognition. So I just wanted to say that people say that the movies made money. The movies did not make money. The movies lost money. This takes into account marketing. This takes into account the studio cut. This takes into account the inflated production budgets. This takes it all into account. It looks at it over 8 years, and the final conclusion, the films lost money. It's not about what they did at the box office. It's about how much of that money trickled down into the studio coffers. And at the end of the day, the studio came out of pocket to do all of this. It was on them. It was on their dime to do this. We didn't give them any money. And it says here, confidence, box office order magnitude, very high, 90 to 95%.
So over 8 years, with all the money coming in, the end result is of all those movies up to that point, we've lost $35 million. We've actually not increased our bucket of gold at all. We've actually taken out $35 million from it, which is that's incomprehensible when Lucasfilm should have been, by these movies, it should have more than paid for the acquisition. Instead of, you've spent $4 billion and you've lost another 35.
Well, and like I said, the articles in 2012 during the acquisition was Lucasfilm is underutilized. There's pent up demand. This is they called it a profit engine. This is basically plug it in and wait and let it print money for you and sit back. That is not the case. I'm here to tell you, but the numbers do not support any conclusion that these made money. And even if they did, now look at this, 90 to 95% here based on verifiable figures and industry practices. Even if it made money, almost nothing. You'd have to still overcome 35 million just to hit zero. So anyway, now and real quick, Bonzo here says, I find it impossible to believe that KK wanted to save her reputation. She kept doing the same thing over and over. She had to know it wasn't working at some point. Seems more like petty spite to me. I do think there was a belief that she could throw the Hail Mary, and she just kept throwing it and throwing it and throwing it, and it was an interception every time. And before you know it,
I think we really have a cycle. I mean, I think there's psychological issues here that you've studied the Byzantine Empire. When we look at things, we don't understand how these Byzantine emperors made so many big mistakes that would unravel their empire. Right? It's hard to imagine it because because we're not able to understand the incredible psychological pressure they were under to maintain their place in history, the place of the history of the empire, right? And then they kept doubling down and making mistakes because it was impossible to face that they had made a mistake.
Well, right. And I think there's social pressures. And today we talk about bubbles, political bubbles, you can get bad advice. And if you really don't, I always say this, reality, I learned some hard lessons in my life. Reality is a mountain, and everything that is said out there is fog. And if you don't know reality, if you don't know where that mountain is, and someone's telling you to ignore your instrumentation, you will crash into that mountain. You will crash into that mountain, and you are going to be left picking up the pieces. So I've always made it a personal cause, and no one's perfect at this, but you have to know what's real and what's not. And if you're surrounded by people telling you things that aren't true, you'll crash into the mountain. And I feel like once this thing crashed into the mountain, once the reality revealed itself, there was a doubling down in denial of that, and this thing kept crashing. Almost like those video game characters in the
well,
corner.
It's like this. In my personal life, when I'm on a diet, I'm working out, I'm aiming, I daily check my weight, weekly check my weight, and when I see that it's going in the direction I don't want it to go, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to readjust my diet or my workout schedule, or something has to change because it's not going in the direction that it's supposed to be going in, right?
Right.
And that's me reacting to feedback directly, which is what a rational person does. When you're surrounded by people saying you don't need to step on the scale, trust us, you're looking great, you don't need to go to the doctor, your health is great, no blood tests needed, you're in perfect shape. This is dangerous.
Right.
It's dangerous, right? She's being told, don't look at these figures. She's being told,
right,
don't worry about it. Next one, you're going to fix it on the next one. It's all good, madam.
Right. So she's ignoring the instrumentation on her little Cessna, and she's flying through the fog, and people say, don't worry, we got you. And then boom, this thing hits. And now you're overseeing Star Wars 8 years later, and you haven't made a dime on Star Wars. So even though they said it started strong, I just showed you when you add it all up, it did not end with a profit. Okay, so here's the next phase here. Disney Plus streaming, the billion-dollar sinkhole. If theatrical was a wash, streaming is a full-blown bonfire. The Andor filings alone tell the story. UK production filings and subsequent trade reporting show that Andor's 2-season cost at least $645 million in production spend alone, with season 2 at roughly $291 million, surpassing the budget of The Rise of Skywalker. Add platform marketing, residuals, and overhead, and you are comfortably well into $700 million for this show. All in range for a 24-episode series that brings in no direct revenue and can only be justified via an opaque subscriber value model.
So let's stop there for a second, Douglas. Let's stop there for a second, okay? Because that's pivotal. This actually adds to the psychosis because there is no direct feedback now. You do not have a return. You don't even have TV ratings, right? You have no basis except some internal algorithm that makes you wonder how many people are subscribing to the streamer service because of this show, which is frankly, a crapshoot guesstimate, right? No matter what internal methods they're using, they don't know anything, right? And so that's the reality of it. So now you have a problem here that we're now going into this streaming model where she's putting in $700 million with no feedback as to return.
No returns. And so this is where I think we have a perfect storm. We have a person who's categorically failed at being profitable the second she took over the studio.
Yeah.
With something that was almost a sure thing. Coupled that with Iger's vision, he's almost a little bit more forgivable because there was a streaming craze and pretty much all of the studio, everyone got into this.
And Iger's a follow the flock sort of guy. He's not a leader.
It wasn't just Iger. Everyone got into this. Everyone started buying up IPs. So you basically had Iger's what would prove to be a misaligned vision for streaming being the end all be all, throwing money at this one person who can't make it back. And you've got LucasFilm. So now, by the way, Bonzo here says Andor was still money well spent. From a fan position, I really did like Andor. But if I had to run this company, I don't think I would say it was money well spent. I would much rather have.
I think it's Shanatsky in the chat saying that you can made it for half of that. You could. These are all highly bloated money laundering garbage. There's no reason for any of these shows to cost this much. There really isn't. I know because I work in TV. There's no reason for this level of cost. There isn't.
There's not. That's what I'm saying. So 700. And by the way, I did another analysis. This is an earlier analysis. The final cost for all of Andor was in the 800 millions by the end of it.
This thing is still being conservative, yeah.
Right. So this is still kind of, playing it safe. If it costs $120 million to make Mando and Grogu, the film that's going to be released next year or later this year. Is it later this year? Yeah.
I believe it is.
I think it's March or I'm sorry, May of this year.
Yeah, it's coming this year. Yeah.
So 120 million, it'll make that back. I confidently could tell you.
Yeah, no, it should be. Again, here's a smart, successful filmmaker who knows how to control a budget.
Right. So 700, Favre. Yeah, so 700 million on a non-theatrical release, it's almost unfathomable. So anyway, across the portfolio, estimated streaming investment for Star Wars branded Lucasfilm series, The Mandalorian, Andor, Obi-Wan, Boba Fett, Ahsoka, The Acolyte, Skeleton Crew, and all the animated titles, roughly $2.64 billion spent. That is money that is lost. That is spent. It's gone. You're never going to see a ticket sale on it. You're never going to see any sort of theatrical release. That money is gone on the belief, and this is where I think Iger comes into the picture, that will essentially make it all back from a monthly subscription service. That they'll buy a movie ticket every month.
Yeah, and there's no evidence of, my understanding is they just haven't grown that streamer to justify.
Yeah, I have an Iger quote later on. He says it's categorically dead. The idea of streaming as a profitability model is over. He said that in June of 2025. So he has conceded.
I'm glad he figured that out. I figured that out maybe 7-8 years ago, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, we totally. In fact, a lot of YouTubers, when we ran the numbers, were like, how could this be profitable? But I think we were all confused, perhaps. Maybe we weren't. But there was that. Is streaming making this all back? But yeah. And by the way, you can even see some of the deference to her projects over like a Favreau project.
Mm-hmm.
The Mandalorian, each season cost 120 million. Yeah. And then you look at like Obi-Wan and Andor. These are over 200 to 300 $1 million. Acolyte was over 200 and almost 300 million, right? So she spent a lot of money. All the most disciplined budgets were Jon Favreau production, including Skeleton Crew. They didn't spend a lot of money on that.
Yeah.
Aggressive estimates for attributable Disney Plus subscriber is vague, less than $1 billion. Net streaming loss in the order of $1.85 billion. All
right. So we've had 30. What was it? $30 million loss on altogether movies at the end of the day. Now, so now we're crossing into 2.1 billion of just loss from everything being done there on actual produced television and movie work.
Right. And now the only entity that could do this is Disney. They had at the time almost unlimited funds. Who knows where they got all that money? But
yeah, I mean, again, you can have you can have a Amex, black card, but one day you got to pay it back, right?
Yeah,
that's all. Disney's unlimited funds. They're on the hook to somebody for that, and eventually they come collect.
And manliness and motivation says how much of the budgets are to money laundering. I have heard a lot of theories on that. By the way,
I think in the case of the Acolyte, it's at least 70%. I mean, that no $300 million was spent on screen on that.
Well, somehow you've got a corporation in America literally losing money by the billions. We haven't seen that. I mean, I've never seen anything like it really, like for me, like this. It says Disney leadership has effectively conceded the model is broken. By mid-2025, CEO Bob Iger was publicly stating that the prior streaming land grab economics were not sustainable and that budgets and volume would be cut. Confidence. So it says 80 to 90%. These are still very high confidence ratings.
Yeah.
So the parks. The park story is binary. Galaxy's Edge and the Galactic Star Cruiser. It says the capital spend $800 million across 2 parks, not widely understood to be operationally profitable, with estimates in the low hundreds of millions per year in incremental revenue. In this capital-focused window, 2012 to 2026, that $800 million sits largely unrecovered. The asset's payoff horizon runs into the next decade.
So we're talking about it's made a few $100 million back, but it still hasn't covered the cost of the park additions.
Correct. And so
we're still in the red.
Now they just announced that they're putting the OG characters into Galaxy's Edge, and that it was originally skinned to be original trilogy. So there's a great chance that they could pull this. If they just did what the obvious thing was to make it original trilogy, you might really attract people again to come to the park.
Well, and this was, by the way, I reported this on my Patreon almost 2 years ago, that Jon Favreau was fighting with the Disney the head office's accountants, because he was demanding money to revamp Galaxy's Edge to bring it back to OG Star Wars, Vader, and all that stuff. And they said, now we look at the figures that they're looking at. They said, no, we're not going to give you any money. And he's like, look, you got to spend it on this, otherwise it's all a sinkhole. Everything else, you've allowed her to sink everything down. Give me money so I give you some chance of making it back. Well, I reported that 2 years ago.
Well, and by the way, part of the joy or part of the profit center of a theme park is merchandise and retail sales. Yeah. And if you're creating movies and no one's buying your Rey figurines and your Rey mugs and your Kylo Ren lightsabers anymore, then stocking your theme park full of this stuff it's just sitting there. So, this kind of compounds itself in a lot of ways. The Galactic Star Cruiser, conservative capital costs estimate between 300 and 350 million for a 100-room cruise-style hotel experience.
Which they would then shut down.
Which they did. Yeah, it didn't even last a year, by the way, which is stunning. Again, this is Star Wars. Disney has disclosed a tax write-off of about $300 million tied to its closure in September 2023, implying that the bulk of the investment was written down. Operational occupancy never came close to justifying the price point. The project was shut down after roughly 18 months. And I think it was actually closer to 11 months, if I remember. But unless I'm misreading something from before. From a 2012-2026 earnings lens, the conservative treatment is Park Capital invested $1.15 billion, recoveries via operating profit ongoing, but not yet enough to fully offset the CapEx over analysis window.
So they're still in the red at this time. Yeah, okay.
They're in the red. Confidence 85 to 95%. This is high confidence numbers.
So
Publishing.
Now we've lost money on the movies. We've lost money on the parks. All right.
We've lost money on the movies. We've lost money on the streaming, the shows. We've lost money in the parks. Star Wars, again, it's hard to imagine.
It's incomprehensible, but we just keep going.
Publishing is the only clean profit center, still a red flag. Ironically, the one business that looks conventionally healthy is publishing books and comics. Even here,
that's because it's limited capital. It's limited capital investment. I know I write books, right? It's limited capital. You've written books too. I mean, it's not like investing in a TV show or a park.
Right. You can produce a book. Honestly, Disney could produce a Star Wars book for like $50,000 and then just put it out there, and it's going to make millions because you have a built-in fan base that's going to buy it. Even if you lose half of that, you're still going to make money off publishing with an IP like Star Wars. Mm-hmm. The aggregate book revenue is estimated around $2.15 billion against roughly a $460 million. There you go.
So we're looking at $1.5 billion in profit there, which is very believable.
Right. And it says, but the High Republic initiative reveals an underlying weakness. Light of the Jedi, the flagship High Republic launch novel, sold an order of 158,000 copies. That is low. Wow, that is low. 158
for Star Wars. That's incredibly low.
Subsequent adult entries fell by roughly half each time, with later books scrapping into the low tens of thousands. Across adult and young A, the total High Republic brand book sales are under 500,000 total units. Wow. Compared to the 15 million copies sold.
Just of the original Tron trilogy. We're not talking about the EU. We're talking about just those 3 books.
Wow. And that's in the 90s. Those are 90s dollars.
Yes.
Wow. 15 million. So that gives you an idea of scale. Yeah. 3 books printed under the Star Wars name in 1990 sold 15 million copies. And
versus low tens of thousands. I mean, this is incomprehensible.
Incomprehensible. From a franchise equity perspective, that collapse matters. Pre-Disney, Star Wars publishing was good for something like $250 million a year across 14 years. That baseline would suggest a $3.5 billion in revenue. The Disney era comes closer to 2.15, implying an opportunity shortfall of about 1.35 billion. So it's profitable in its own terms, but versus what Star Wars used to command, it is underperforming by more than $1 billion in missing demand, driven largely by declining enthusiasm for the on-screen products.
Yeah, exactly. You don't buy the Star Wars franchise to get this kind of return. So that 30 years after the Thrawn books, people are buying $5, $7, $8, $9, $10,000, 10,000 copies of a book in its run. You don't do that. It's not worth your time to do that.
No, it's not. And we've all seen. I remember knowing that no one was going to be into the High Republic. I as a fellow Cameron, you have a creative instinct on what people are going to like on some level, and no one's 100%. There are things that I think won't work that do, and there's things that I say will definitely work that don't. But
when they have a character that's a rock, right? I mean, you're just thinking, is your brain not functioning? Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny that they even had concept art for it. I was like, dude, it's just a rock. You don't need concept art. Just grab one from the backyard. So anyway, games, overhead, and integration, death by 1,000 cuts. Video games, Star Wars linked game projects over this period likely absorbed about $320 million in Lucasfilm side cost and generated perhaps $50 million in licensing revenue, leaving a net loss of around $270 million. Corporate overhead, these are separate costs. Corporate overhead, running Lucasfilm as a top-tier studio, San Francisco headquarters, executive compensation, shared services reasonably sits around $100 million per year.
Before we go forward, let's just stop for a second. Video games. So if you're making $320 million investment in video games and you're getting $50 million, I mean, that's that is just, I can't, it's hard to process that because nobody's buying these damn games, right? And you don't put in $320 million expecting $50 million coming back in. You're expecting $400 million, $500 million.
That's 15.5%
that they got.
That's 15.5% return. That's atrocious. So again, Star Wars is failing in every sector. Like if we were on the Titanic and the Titanic was called Lucasfilm, every light would be flashing red at this point and being like, what do we do, boss? You know, every compartment is flooding. We're underwater. So now, and this is part of the analysis too. This is important because most of the analyses never include corporate overhead. You still have to pay everybody to run this. And they say that if you take it over 14 years based on best available information, that it cost $1.4 billion to run Lucasfilm over that period. So you still have to pay to keep the doors open. You have to pay $1.4 billion to lose $13 billion. So you gotta keep the doors open there. And then this is important too: integrating and restructuring, shuttering LucasArts. God, how many of us remember in the early 90s playing like X-Wing on our computers and just being like absorbed in that? LucasArts, I'll never forget it. Anyway, shuttering LucasArts, integrating ILM and Skywalker Sound into Disney's broader production pipeline, absorbing failed size projects like Willow, carried a material one-time charge, plausible allocations put into these integrating and restructuring costs of nearly $2.8 billion. So these are, again, corporate investments into the future of the company that they never got back over this period. Based on reported layoffs, project cancellations, and typical large-scale media merger and acquisition patterns, they lost $2.8 billion restructuring Lucasfilm to integrate it into Disney. None of these numbers is individually decisive. Collectively, they are. Confidence, direct losses magnitude between 60 and 80%. Overhead is structurally unavoidable, but the precise allocations and integrated costs requiring triangulating from restructuring disclosures and standard practice. So let's see, two final layers: goodwill and asset impairments related to flops like Solo, the Star Cruiser, the Dial of Destiny, plus broader Star Wars brand erosion, a reasonable $1.2 billion aggregate write-down, and tangible losses, meaning Disney had to concede a loss beyond what they spent in order to save money on taxes. $1.2 billion tangible write-down across intangible and tangible assets over that window. So if you're in business, I run a business, so I have to do this sometimes too. You will spend money that you lose, and sometimes you can write that off. And what it does is it saves you from spending money on
the money's going to go out the door one way or the other. It's either going to go out the door in the thing you're spending on or in taxes. So you might as well see maybe some value can come out of spending it on that thing.
Right. So there is an accounting value to this. This is why Willow got basically scorched from existence, because it was more valuable as a tax write-off than it was as something to be plugged on Disney Plus that seemed to be provoking people more than getting viewership. Opportunity cost. If the original $4.0 billion outlay and subsequent streaming and park capital had been deployed into historically high return Disney projects or even broad equity markets,
as in if you just invested it in a stock equity fund, like an index fund. Or even a broad equity market, right? If they invested the money somewhere, the company would likely be sitting on billions more in value. A conservative allowance is roughly 0.5 to 1 billion in opportunity cost lost. In economic terms, opportunity cost means what else you could have done with that money. If I owe Cameron $500 and I'm like, I'll pay you next year, he's losing the opportunity to spend that $500 in the subsequent year. So he's lost the $500 opportunity cost that I get. So if I owe Cameron $500, I invest that $500 and I say I'll pay him back next year. He's like, okay. I take the $500, I buy a stock, I make $100, and then I pay Cameron back. I made $500. He lost the opportunity to do that because he waited a year for me to pay him. That's what an opportunity cost is. So they're saying they lost money just in the opportunity cost of misallocating these funds. So I did a calculation of, had they just put the $4 billion in some kind of equity investment in the stock market that brings in, let's say, 5%, right, a year. That's
Okay.
a 5% return. They, over 14 years, that would have ballooned into $8 billion. So they would have a $4 billion profit just from doing that.
Oh my
There'd
God.
be $8 billion in their pockets instead of 4. Now they've spent 4, and then they've had all these losses on top.
Oh my God. That's insane, because so opportunity cost is a big deal, because it does mean you could spend your money on Last Jedi, or you could buy the stock that or equity fund that Cameron just said, and you spend it in the way that you think you'll make the most money. Especially if you're an investment grade thinker, you'll spend that money very carefully. These people are investment grade thinkers. Now, they're investment grade thinkers in a very specific industry, and so their job is to spend that money wisely in the way their industry does, to be competitive and make the most amount of money that you can by making great products that, you know, the culture and hopefully the globe loves. And they're clearly not living up to this simple command, you know, in their own industry. And by the way, Disney before 2012 was pretty much dominating the box office. I mean, they were having hit after hit after hit. So here it is. When all the layers are stacked, a coherent range emerges. Operating net, negative 1.6 billion, negative 1.4 for corporate overhead, negative 2.8 from integrating and restructuring, negative 1.2 from asset depreciation, negative 1.35 from tax account opportunity costs we talked about, negative 4.05 billion from the acquisition costs of Lucasfilm, publishing underperformance historically at 1.35 economic shortfall. Taken together, these elements yield a plausible comprehensive loss in the neighborhood of $14 to $16 billion over 2012 to 2026, depending on how aggressively one treats the opportunity cost and how much of the impairment and overhead is attributed specifically to Lucasfilm rather than the studio complex as a whole. So it says, from a strict, generally accepted accounting practices standpoint, not every one of these dollars will show up as a single line item called Lucasfilm loss. But from an economic and capital allocation perspective, the one investors care about, the conclusion is hard to avoid. Disney's Star Wars era has so far destroyed value on the order of a mid-sized studio acquisition, not created it.
Yeah. Confidence,
80 to 85%. The hard data anchor the estimate. The rest can move several hundred million either way, but not enough to erase that 14 to 16 billion whole win for a franchise once synonymous with effortless generational profit. This is one of the most damning ledger entries of all.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is so mind-boggling, you know, and it's just that this was allowed to go on for 14 years. You know,
right?
Yeah, it's very strange, and again, I don't believe the claim. I don't believe the claim that she has the Kathleen Kennedy has a contract that prohibits her being fired from cause. I've never heard of any contract in history where, I mean, you go commit murder and you're going to still be owed a salary. I mean, you can be fired for cause. You go shoot somebody in the office, you're still going to be owed a salary. It's not rational, right? And so I don't believe that. So it's left with that there's some internal personal dynamic, which I call the word blackmail, because there's no other rational explanation for it between her and Bob Iger.
Yeah, well, and you'll find this interesting. Let me see if I could find this. I was curious. So I looked this up on AI. And again, AI is not all bad. You never want to use it to compensate for your own lack of creativity. Mm-hmm. But it can pull up good information for you. And I found this, and I think this was worth it. I asked AI, has Bob Iger said anything about Kathleen Kennedy? This is all Bob Iger said. I'm going to read it out loud here. Mm-hmm. In his official statement announcing Kennedy's departure, Bob Iger said, "When we acquired Lucasfilm more than a decade ago, we knew we were bringing into the Disney family not only one of the most beloved and enduring storytelling universes ever created, but also a team of extraordinary talent led by a visionary filmmaker, someone who had been handpicked by George Lucas himself, no less." He's not me. I didn't pick her. Mm-hmm. We're deeply grateful for Kathleen Kennedy's leadership, her vision, and her stewardship of such an iconic studio and brand. That is a very boring last comment.
Yeah.
I mean, that's almost deliberately.
It's like robotic accounting talk, right? I mean, so there's no enthusiasm or passion.
Not at all. Like, if this is what someone said about me after I spent, multi-decade career in an industry, and I come to this studio and I try to perform for them for 14 years, and they're like, yeah, we're great. This guy was handpicked by Lucas. We brought him in, and we're deeply grateful. So yeah, I'd be like, wow. I would know immediately that I have just been shunned with a brief, concise, lifeless, colorless statement like that.
So I want to let you know. So I did a very conservative investment thing of opportunity cost of 5%. You could put that my personal. I'm not giving investment advice. I personally love to invest in in real estate REITs personally. That and they can average in over time about 5% a year, right? Okay, or more.
Okay,
but let's say that's why I gave a conservative 5%. So I actually just did an analysis. If they had just put it on $4 billion for in a index fund or mutual fund, hedge fund that was investing only in NASDAQ 100 stocks, right? That over the 2012 to 2026, NASDAQ averaged out 17% a year in return. So had they just put it in there in some mutual fund or hedge fund that just did a passive investment in NASDAQ 100 stocks, that would have resulted in a $36 billion final outcome. So a $32 billion profit off of a $4 billion investment, right?
Are you kidding me?
I just ran it right now. NASDAQ 100, which is, a standard sort of, people, that's a standard index, right?
Yeah, this is what most Americans who have any disposable wealth, that's what they'll put it in. Hoping for retirement one day. They leave it there, they forget about it, or a 401k or a 529 plan. These kind of things, they put them in these kind of mutual funds, and they're expected to make some kind of money. That's a lot of money. And that's
again, we're talking about a $4 billion base, but because it went up and down, but it averaged 17% over that 14-year period. And so there were some years it made 50%, some years it underperformed. It averaged out to 17%. And so they would have made a $32 billion profit from doing nothing but sending it over to Fidelity Investments and say, could just put this in an index fund and let us know how things are. That's it.
So that's what the write-up was saying. Mm-hmm. How much did they lose? Some of it's dependent on how you approach that opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Because Cameron just showed if you did a basic, simplistic investment, you could have tripled, quadrupled your return on that $4 billion investment. So that's uncomfortably catastrophic. That makes me concerned who's running the show at some of these things, because honestly, and Cameron, I know we've said this before, 2012 to 2026, with kind of money available, with the advent of streaming, a new trilogy, this should have been a golden decade. This should have been a golden age for all the best IPs. And instead we're in the time, if you believe in the multiverse, we're in the timeline where all the greatest IPs all lost money. I feel like we're in the Avengers. We're on the one timeline that these all lost money. That's our reality. That's the world we live.
I mean, but did Avengers lose money? I don't think so.
Nope.
Right. So that is, again, that's like the Doctor Strange finds the one timeline where his franchise survives, right? His company survives, right? But again, this is we reached, I think the last 16 years has been the proof of the Peter principle. We had an entire company and its boss company, LucasFilm, and its boss company, Disney, that was essentially being run by people that had reached the level of their incompetence. They had all risen up to a point where they were no longer capable of doing the job. That's true of Miss Kennedy. That's true of Bob Iger. I mean, that's, the thing is, Bob Chapek, who has now been crucified, was trying to fix the company, and Iger ended up doing everything Chapek was trying to do and took credit for it, right?
And so, he blamed.
Chapek, everything Chapek tried to do, Iger comes in and just does it and puts his name on it, right? And so this was the Peter principle. This last 14 years has been the most incompetent people in Hollywood in charge of the largest amount of monies in this company in particular. I mean, Warner Brothers and others had their silliness, right? But there's nothing like this, I think.
I don't think so, because if you would have told me just a couple years ago that Lucasfilm would have broken even, if you would have said, Doug, Lucasfilm is going to break even with all the, the $4 billion and the Force Awakens revenue, I'd have been like, if they break even, that's a disaster. That's what I'd have been like. That's a disaster, because there's no way you shouldn't be able to make a buck. If 4 years ago you would have said, Doug, they're going to lose $1 billion, I would have said we're in catastrophic territory. We're in a reality, 2026, where we're looking at the numbers and it looks like $14 billion lost. And by the way, I'm not even adjusting for inflation. What was spent in 2012 is actually a much higher number in 2026 dollars than it was back then. So
then you just lose your mind at that point. Then it's too much. It's too much to process.
Right. I'm just saying,
it would take a half an hour trying to process that. But by the way, so people should know. Last night I sent this analysis through my network to Sparrow, who got back within an hour. They went through it and they said this is accurate. This is accurate, because they're the ones that gave you the $14 billion number, and they said this is about right. And so this feels like this thing hit it right on the nose.
It's amazing too, because when you said that, I believed that, but I just wanted to hear how it was possible, and I just expected the AI to say it's not possible, and instead it literally stated to me. I'll read you what it said. I couldn't believe the actual verbiage that it said. It said, your insider information at Lucasfilm $14 billion loss is highly credible and mathematically defensible. I was like, what? So then I started freaking out. I was like, that's incredible. It showed the bottom line. It said the $14 billion Lucasfilm loss claim is plausible, credible, mathematically sound when accounting for, and it lists out all the things that we just talked about, because this is not an exaggeration. This is what happens when a $4 billion acquisition underperforms expectations, and operational overhead compounds for over 14 years. The charts above and detailed analysis provide a complete financial roadmap to how this was possible. So that's incredible. That's an incredible statement to me, that would actually be upheld. And this model even suggests that it could have been even higher.
Well, that's the point. Is it's a model consistently say it's a conservative estimate, right?
Right.
But ultimately, the conservative probably is right, because this is the number that our person came to us with, and then said this analysis seems right. So it feels like this is fair. This isn't underestimating it. It's not overestimating it. This is about what happened here.
Right. And the one thing that sometimes helps me out, again, if once you frame off and box off what it is you're asking and everything, you'll get a pretty unfiltered answer. So sometimes your biases are put in check. My personal biases will be put in check. Like, for example, I asked it what for the last stream, what Kathleen Kennedy's success rate was, and it said 62%. And at first I was like, 62? That's insane. But when you account for her previous contributions, E.T., Back to the Future,
the credits, it did an overarching look at her credits.
Right. And Retro Nerd Girl said, she goes, actually, I think that's a fair assessment. So it was interesting.
We're not judging whether those credits are fairly earned. They're just credits.
Correct. That's exactly right. So sometimes by really crunching data, you can weed out your own biases and get something that's relatively even-handed. And I think that's what we got. I think this is a pretty fair assessment of what happened there. And if so, I think there's going to be a very fast readjusting over there at Lucasfilm. I know in that article, it sounded like she's still like haunting the halls of Lucasfilm a little bit. But what we saw with J.J. Abrams showed me that once you've lost the reputation in Hollywood, probably in most industries, all your supporters lose their reputation. If they were riding on your coattails, they become unhireable. The whole system starts to become ghosted. And so other people come in. I think that's going to happen. I mean, you're better at predicting.
She's finished. She's finished. J.J. Abrams is making a comeback, right? He's making a comeback. She ain't making no comeback. she'll make a comeback off of the coattails of her husband, Frank. She'll continue to do what she's done for 50 years, which is put her name on things she hasn't worked on, right? And she hasn't been a factor in, because she's had now 14 years to prove that she doesn't know what she's doing. So we've now understand that the 40 years before that she just got her name on a list of people that weren't responsible for the successes of those movies. Right. And so, and that's not been proved. J.J. Abrams, he's a mover and shaker and survivor. He's already making a comeback. He's got another movie coming out. He's going to have to earn back trust, because he really got decimated by this town. And I've talked about it a lot on my Patreon, right? He got destroyed by this town. He lost his status, much like she did. But, the difference is he's not perceived to be arrogant, right? And I've met the man once. He seemed very gracious and normal. I met him once at Penn State when I was teaching there. And he seemed like a nice, normal person. Took a photo with him. Very friendly. No arrogance that I vibed. But I've met Miss Kennedy and Frank Marshall. And, let's just say it's a different vibe. It's a different. Frank's a very likable guy. I just got a little bit of a different vibe from Miss Kennedy, right?
Interesting.
Let's just say very reserved is the word that I would put. Right. And whereas J.J. was personable and likable, Frank Marshall is personable and likable. That energy of personable and likableness is very helpful in getting you back on town. But when the energy comes of, you're a queen sitting on a throne, which was my vibe of my meeting with her. Again, she won't even remember that she did. This was, if you recall, if you're watching, Miss Kennedy and Mr. Marshall, you came to speak when I was a business student at the Tuck Business School at Dartmouth, and we were in a small room. You spoke to all of us. You spoke to the general Dartmouth College community in a big theater, and then you came and gave a talk to the MBA students in a small room, and I was present. And I asked you some questions, and I met with Frank Marshall in LA later based on an idea that I was developing at the time, and he graciously met with me. That is her perception, and I don't think you can come back when you're perceived that way.
Interesting. Well, and J.J. Abrams was kind of he seemed to have the answer in the era of nostalgia, right? Mystery boxes. I mean, he got away with this thing, so maybe he's figured out he's going to have to do this the right way. You're going to have to produce quality material. You can't rely on a gimmick that is not meant to last, a short-term gimmick,
Yeah, and we'll see what he does with this one. So, my friend, I apologize. I need to start heading out. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just quickly plug my Patreon, throw it in the chat. So, as you can see, this is wonderful. This is one of the best streams I've ever been on. People already on my Patreon are live commenting that this is the information on this stream is incredible.
Awesome.
And so, it's valuable. Thank you for Douglas for doing it. It's been confirmed by my source Sparrow that these numbers that you ran are accurate. And so you really did an amazing job here. You probably did better than most, analysts at The Economist or Business Week would be doing with this. So you did a good job. And you can on Patreon. I actually would, with your permission, I'd love to post this this entire analysis page by page on the Patreon. If you're
of course, yeah, your Patreon's great. I love everybody over there. They're awesome.
So I'm going to throw that in the chat. Come join me in the Patreon, because this is the origin of it. Is that we got the scoop on Friday that this was the number, and now we've confirmed that number is believable.
Yeah, it's a highly credible number, not what I expected, which was maybe. No, it was like, yeah, this tracks. The math tracks. So anyway, yeah, if you enjoyed what you liked here, consider subscribing to Cameron's Patreon. We have our own discussions over there. We talk about pop culture over there. Cameron Pasha, Patreon, and of course, I'm Doug Burton. Don't forget to click like, and if you like this, to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
God bless everyone. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye.